She sank into darkness, believing the river would be kinder than the world, but something ancient rose from below and refused to let her go. The river swallowed her without ceremony. No splash, no struggle, just the cold embrace of water closing over a body too tired to fight anymore. Clara Morrison had walked into the Thames at midnight, her pockets weighted with stones she'd collected from the garden wall of the boarding house where no one knew her name. 23 years old, orphaned at 16, dismissed from her position as a governess 3 days prior for reasons whispered but never spoken aloud. The world above had become unbearable, so she chose the world below. But the river had a guardian. Elias Thorne had walked the banks of the Thames for 217 years, watching the desperate and the damned surrender to the current. He never interfered. Death was a mercy he understood intimately, the one gift he could no longer give himself. But when her body drifted past the broken pier near Southwark, something arrested him. Her face, even in death's approach, held no peace, only exhaustion. He moved faster than human sight could register, plunging into the black water without hesitation. His hands found her waist, her arms, the cold weight of stones dragging her down. He tore the fabric, scattered the stones, and pulled her upward with inhuman strength. They broke the surface together. Clara's lungs refused to work. Water filled every hollow space inside her. Elias dragged her onto the muddy bank, her body limp and colorless under the fog-obscured moon. He pressed his palm against her sternum, felt the silent stillness where a heartbeat should have been. "No," he whispered, and it was the first word he'd spoken aloud in 7 months. He tilted her head back, parted her blue lips, and breathed into her mouth. Not air, but something older. Something that tasted of centuries and starlight and the terrible weight of immortality. Once, twice, a third time, desperate now, pressing his forehead to hers as if he could will her soul back from wherever it had fled. Her body convulsed. Water erupted from her lungs in violent, choking gasps. Her eyes flew open, gray as winter fog, wide with terror and confusion. She tried to scream but could only cough, her fingers clawing at the mud beneath her. Elias pulled back, giving her space, his own chest heaving though he had no need for breath. "You're alive," he said quietly. "You're safe." Clara's gaze found him through the darkness and the rain beginning to fall. She saw a man perhaps 30 years old, pale as alabaster, dressed in clothes from another era, a long black coat, boots that belonged to the previous century. His eyes were the color of amber burning in firelight, beautiful and wrong. "Who?" she gasped, shivering violently. "What did you—" "I pulled you from the river," Elias said. "Nothing more." But that was a lie, and some instinct deep in Clara's reborn body knew it. "I wanted to die," she whispered, and the words cracked like breaking glass. Elias looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he removed his coat and draped it over her trembling shoulders. It was impossibly warm, as if it held the memory of a heartbeat. "I know," he said, "but the river gave you back. Perhaps that means something." Clara pulled the coat tighter, her teeth chattering. "Perhaps it means I'm cursed to suffer longer." "Perhaps," Elias stood, offering his hand. "Or perhaps you've been given a second chance to discover what you're truly meant to survive." She stared at his outstretched palm. Even through the cold and the shock, she felt something emanating from him. Not heat, but presence, like standing near a flame that cast no light. Against every rational thought, she took his hand. His skin was cold, but his grip was steady. He pulled her to her feet, and Clara swayed, dizzy and disoriented. Elias steadied her, his other hand on her elbow, keeping her upright when her legs threatened to buckle. "Where do you live?" he asked. "Nowhere," Clara said honestly. "I was dismissed. I have no position, no family. No—" Her voice broke. "Nothing." Elias was silent for a moment, considering something that went against every principle he'd lived by for 2 centuries. Then he made a choice that would unravel both their fates. "Come with me," he said, "just for tonight, until you're warm and well enough to decide what comes next." Clara should have refused, should have recognized the danger in following a strange man through the London fog. But something in his voice, ancient and weary and unbearably gentle, made her feel safer than she'd felt in years. "Why would you help me?" she asked. Elias looked back toward the river, toward the darkness that had almost claimed her. "Because 200 years ago," he said quietly, "someone pulled me from a different kind of drowning, and I've been trying to repay that debt ever since." He began walking, and Clara followed, her wet dress clinging to her skin, her bare feet stumbling over cobblestones. She didn't know where they were going, didn't know what had truly happened beneath the water when his breath filled her lungs. But for the first time in months, she felt something other than despair. She felt curious, and behind them, the Thames flowed on, keeping its secrets, having surrendered one soul it should have kept. Clara woke to candlelight and silk. She was lying in a bed so soft it felt like floating, covered in blankets that smelled of lavender and something indefinable, something like autumn forests and time itself. The room was cavernous, with vaulted ceilings painted in faded frescoes of angels and demons locked in eternal combat. Heavy velvet curtains blocked out whatever existed beyond the windows. She sat up slowly, her body aching but alive. Someone had changed her clothes. She now wore a white linen nightgown that belonged to a previous century, the fabric worn soft with age. Her wet dress was gone. Her hair had been brushed and dried. Panic fluttered in her chest. "You're awake!" Clara's head snapped toward the voice. Elias stood in the doorway, backlit by the hallway's golden glow. He hadn't changed clothes, still wore the same dark trousers, the white shirt now rolled to his elbows. In the candlelight, his skin looked even paler, almost translucent. "Where am I?" Clara asked, pulling the blanket higher. "My home." Elias moved into the room, but kept his distance, respecting the invisible boundary of her fear. "You collapsed on the walk here. I brought you to the guest room. A woman from the neighborhood, Mrs. Hartley, came to help you change. You've been asleep for 16 hours. 16 hours. Clara's hand flew to her throat, feeling the pulse there. Steady, strong, impossible. "I should have been dead," she whispered. "Yes," Elias agreed quietly. "You should have." Their eyes met across the room. In the daylight, or what passed for it behind those heavy curtains, Clara could see him more clearly. He was beautiful in a way that unsettled her, too perfect, too still. His face held no lines of age, no imperfections, no signs of living. "What are you?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Elias smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's a complicated question. I have time." Clara's voice was steadier now. "Apparently I have more time than I thought I would." He studied her for a long moment, as if deciding how much truth she could bear. Then he moved to the window and pulled back the curtain just an inch. Rain lashed against the glass. Gray afternoon light filtered through. "Do you believe in monsters, Clara Morrison?" She startled at the sound of her name. "I never told you my name." "Your identification papers were in your dress pocket," Elias said. "I had to know who you were, to understand what drove you to the river." Clara's hands clenched in the blanket. The vulnerability of being known by a stranger felt like a second drowning. "Monsters," she said, redirecting. "No, I believe in cruelty, in abandonment, in the endless ways people can be destroyed without anyone noticing. But monsters? Those are children's stories." Elias turned from the window to face her fully. In the muted light, his amber eyes seemed to glow. "Then you've been living in a smaller world than you realized," he said. Monsters are real, Clara. They walk among humans every day. They look like us, sound like us. But inside, he placed a hand over his chest where a heart should beat. Inside, were something entirely different. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "We?" Clara whispered. Elias crossed to a tall mirror near the wardrobe, an ornate thing with a gilded frame, its silver surface perfectly polished. He stood before it, and Clara's breath caught. The mirror reflected the room, the bed, the candles. Clara herself, pale and wide-eyed. But where Elias stood, there was only empty space. "I am a vampire," he said simply, his voice echoing strangely in the stillness. "I have been for 217 years. I do not age. I do not sicken. I do not die. And I survive by drinking blood." Clara should have screamed, should have fled. But something in her remained perfectly still, watching this impossible revelation with the detachment of someone who had already surrendered to death once. "You're going to kill me," she said flatly. "No." Elias turned from the mirror, and his expression was so genuinely pained that Clara almost believed him. "I would never. I haven't killed a human in over a century. I feed only on those who are dying anyway, terminal patients who consent, who welcome the end. I take just enough to survive and send them peacefully into death." "How merciful," Clara said, and couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "It's all I have left of my humanity," Elias replied, "the ability to choose mercy over hunger." They regarded each other across the chasm of Clara's mortality and Elias's eternal existence. "Why did you save me?" Clara asked finally. "If you're so committed to respecting death, why pull me from the river?" Elias was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Because when I saw you sinking," he said, "I remembered what it felt like to want to die, to be so broken that oblivion seemed like mercy. And I remembered the person who refused to let me have it, who forced me to keep existing even when I begged for the end." He paused. "I've spent 2 centuries wondering if they were cruel or kind. When I pulled you from the water, I decided to believe they were kind." Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes. "And if I disagree? If I believe you were cruel to bring me back?" "Then I'll apologize," Elias said softly. "And I'll help you find a reason to stay anyway." The rain intensified, drumming against the windows like fingers seeking entrance. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed 3 times. Clara looked down at her hands, pale, trembling, alive against all odds. "I don't have anywhere to go," she admitted. "No employment, no references, no money." "Stay here," Elias said immediately. "For as long as you need. This house has 50 rooms, most of them empty. You can have your own space, your own life. I ask nothing in return except that you live." "Why would you do that?" Elias moved toward the door, giving her privacy, giving her space to process the impossible truth he'd just revealed. "Because loneliness," he said, "is a slower death than drowning. And I've been dying of it for longer than you've been alive." He left, closing the door softly behind him. Clara sat alone in the candle-lit room, wrapped in centuries-old linens, saved by a monster who had chosen mercy over nature. Outside, London churned and thrived, full of the living who believed themselves safe. Inside, a drowned girl and an immortal creature began the strangest salvation either had ever known. Like if you'd accept shelter from hands stained with both blood and mercy. Clara spent 3 days moving through Elias's house like a ghost uncertain of her own haunting. The house was a labyrinth of Victorian elegance and Gothic decay. Rooms filled with furniture draped in white sheets, hallways lined with portraits of people long dead. A kitchen that looked rarely used, and everywhere, books. They lined the walls in towering shelves. They sat stacked on tables, piled on floors, filled entire rooms from floor to ceiling. Some were ancient, their leather bindings cracked with age. Others looked recently printed, their spines unbroken. On the fourth morning, Clara found Elias in what he called the library, though it was really more of a cathedral dedicated to the written word. He sat in a leather chair near the fireplace, reading by the light of oil lamps despite the gray daylight filtering through rain-soaked windows. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression softened. "You're venturing further from your room," he observed. "I was curious," Clara admitted, her fingers trailing along a shelf of poetry collections. Byron, Shelley, Keats, first editions by the look of them. "You have so many books." 217 years' worth, Elias said, setting his own book aside, something in Latin she couldn't decipher. "When you cannot die, you find ways to fill eternity. For me, it's been learning, reading, trying to understand humanity from the outside, since I can no longer experience it from within." Clara pulled a volume from the shelf, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, published 1818. The binding was worn, as if read many times. "Is that how you see yourself?" she asked quietly. "As a monster observing humans?" Elias considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I see myself as someone who was human once and lost the privilege of that existence. I spend my immortality trying to remember what it felt like to be fragile, to be temporary, to matter in the brief, bright way humans do." Clara opened the book, and a pressed flower fell from between its pages, a forget-me-not, faded to gray. "Did you know her?" Clara asked, holding up the delicate thing. "Mary Shelley?" "Briefly." Elias's smile was tinged with melancholy. "I met her in 1824 at a gathering in Florence. She'd recently lost Percy. She spoke about grief the way I'd learned to carry it, as a permanent companion rather than a temporary visitor. We talked about monsters and makers, about who bore the greater sin." Clara carefully replaced the flower, feeling as though she'd glimpsed something sacred. "What conclusion did you reach?" "That we are all both," Elias said, "monsters and makers, creators and destroyers. The capacity for cruelty and kindness exists in equal measure. The only choice we have is which one we feed." Clara moved deeper into the library, drawn by her curiosity. She found journals on one shelf, dozens of them, leather-bound and identical. She pulled one down and opened it without asking permission. The handwriting inside was elegant and masculine. Elias's, she realized. January 17th, 1847. "Today I found a boy dying of consumption in a warehouse near the docks. He was maybe 16. He asked me if angels were real. I told him yes, even though I am proof they are not. I stayed with him until dawn, and he died believing someone cared. It is the closest I've come to prayer in 50 years. Clara looked up, her throat tight. "You've been writing about the people you helped die." Elias stood, crossing to stand beside her. He took the journal gently from her hands, his fingers brushing hers, cold against warm. "Yes," he said. "I write their names, their stories, the last things they said. It's my way of ensuring they're remembered, that their final moments mattered to someone. That's—" Clara struggled for words. "That's beautiful." "It's selfish," Elias corrected quietly. "I do it so I don't forget why I stay. Every name is a reminder that mercy is still possible, that even a monster can serve some purpose in the world." Clara watched him return the journal to its place among hundreds of others. 2 centuries of death and compassion, preserved in ink. "How do you feed now?" she asked, the question both clinical and terrifying. "You said you only take from the dying." "I work with hospitals," Elias explained, moving to pour tea from a service Clara hadn't noticed. He handed her a cup, though she knew he wouldn't drink from his own. "Under different names, different identities. I volunteer with terminal patients, those with days or hours left. I ask their permission to help them pass without pain. most consent. For them, I am simply another caregiver easing their transition. And the blood? Is part of that transition. Elias sat again, his expression distant. I take only enough to sustain myself. They feel no pain, only a gentle fading into sleep. For many, it's the most peaceful death they could hope for. Clara sipped her tea, processing this impossible ethics lesson from an immortal predator who had chosen to become something like a saint. Do you ever miss it? She asked. Being human? Every moment of every night for 217 years, Elias said without hesitation. I miss the sun on my face, the taste of food, the feeling of a heartbeat quickening with fear or joy. I miss being able to die, to end, to finally rest. Why don't you? Clara's voice was soft. Choose to end it? Elias looked at her with those impossible amber eyes, and for the first time, Clara saw the full weight of his existence. Because, he said, I made a promise to the woman who turned me, the one who saved me from my own death. She made me swear that I would live until I found a reason to be grateful for immortality. I've spent 2 centuries searching. Some nights I believe I'll search forever. The fire crackled, rain drummed. Time moved differently in this house, Clara was learning, as if the normal rules of existence bent around Elias's unnatural presence. What if you never find it? Clara asked. The reason to be grateful? Elias smiled, and this time it reached his eyes, sad and sincere. Then at least I'll have spent eternity trying to become worthy of the gift I never wanted. Clara set down her teacup and moved to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked London streets where life continued, oblivious to the impossible truth housed in this Gothic sanctuary. I don't know why I'm still here, she admitted. Why I'm not running. Why I'm not terrified. Perhaps, Elias said quietly from behind her, because you recognize that we're both trying to survive existences we didn't choose. Yours was thrust upon you by circumstance, mine by transformation, but we're both here now, trying to find meaning in the continuation. Clara turned to face him. In the lamplight, he looked less like a monster and more like a man carrying an unbearable burden with as much grace as he could manage. Will you teach me? She asked suddenly. Teach you what? How to want to live again. Elias's expression shifted. Surprise, hope, something tender and cautious. I'm not sure I'm qualified, he said honestly. I'm still learning that myself. Then we'll learn together, Clara said, and felt the first stirring of something she hadn't felt in months. Purpose. Outside, the world turned. Inside, a covenant was forming between the drowning and the deathless, between the girl who wanted to end and the vampire who wanted to begin. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these immortal confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. Their education began in graveyards. If you want to understand life, Elias said, leading Clara through the iron gates of Highgate Cemetery at midnight, you must first make peace with its opposite. The cemetery was a Gothic masterpiece of angels and obelisks, of ivy-covered crypts and weathered stone. Fog clung to the ground like reverent fingers. Clara pulled her borrowed coat tighter, one of Elias's from decades past, smelling of time and something indefinably him. I've had enough death, Clara murmured, following him along a path lined with yew trees. Then you haven't had enough life to balance it, Elias replied, stopping before an elaborate tomb carved with weeping angels. Death teaches us urgency, brevity, the preciousness of every moment we're granted. Humans forget this. They live as if time is infinite, as if tomorrow is guaranteed. He knelt, brushing leaves from a headstone. Margaret Ashford, 1802-1824, beloved daughter taken too soon. Margaret was a painter, Elias said quietly. I met her 3 days before she died of scarlet fever. She told me she'd wasted years worrying about being good enough, about whether her art mattered. In her final hours, she said all she wanted was one more sunrise to paint, one more chance to create something beautiful, even if no one ever saw it. Clara knelt beside him, her fingers tracing the carved letters. Did you? I stayed with her until the end, Elias said, and I've kept one of her paintings in my library for 101 years. A sunrise over the Thames, done in oils. She finished it hours before she died. It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. Clara felt tears burning. Why are you telling me this? Elias looked at her, his face illuminated by moonlight that seemed to avoid his skin, leaving him in perpetual shadow. Because you need to know that even abbreviated lives can hold infinite beauty. That your 23 years mattered just as much as my 217. That choosing to continue isn't about quantity, it's about presence. About being fully alive in whatever time you have. They walked deeper into the cemetery, and Elias shared stories of the dead he'd known. Artists and beggars, children and criminals, each one remembered with equal reverence. His memory was perfect and merciless. He carried them all. Do you remember everyone you've met? Clara asked. Yes, every face, every name, every last breath. Elias's voice held an ache that centuries hadn't diminished. It's both a gift and a curse. I am a living library of the dead. They exist in my memory long after the world has forgotten them. That sounds exhausting. It is. Elias smiled faintly. But it's also purpose. Someone must remember. Someone must carry the stories forward. If that someone is me, then perhaps my immortality serves some function beyond my own continuation. They left the cemetery as dawn threatened the eastern horizon. Elias moved swiftly, keeping to shadows, uncomfortable with the approaching light. Clara noticed his urgency. The sun, she said. Does it kill me? No, but it burns, causes pain. Weakens me significantly. Elias hailed a hansom cab, helping Clara inside before joining her in the darkness. I can survive daylight, but I cannot thrive in it. I am a creature of night by necessity, not choice. The horse clattered through empty London streets. Inside the cab, Clara and Elias sat close enough that she could feel the absence of warmth radiating from him. Cold, but not unpleasant, like marble in winter. Where are we going now? She asked, to show you something that might restore your faith in human resilience. They arrived at St. Thomas's Hospital as the sun crested the rooftops. Elias moved quickly, keeping to covered walkways, his discomfort evident but managed. He led Clara to the children's ward, where gas lamps still burned against the early morning dimness. Inside, amid rows of small beds containing sick and injured children, Elias transformed. He approached a boy of perhaps 8 years, sitting alone by a window, his leg in a splint. The child's face lit up when he saw Elias. "Mr. Thorne, you came!" "I promised I would, didn't I, Thomas?" Elias sat on the edge of the bed, and Clara watched something miraculous. The vampire's usual careful distance evaporated. He was warm with this child, present, attentive, real. "Tell me about the bird you saw yesterday." Thomas launched into an animated story about a robin that had perched on his windowsill. Elias listened with complete focus, asking questions, laughing at the boy's dramatic embellishments. When Thomas's energy flagged, Elias pulled a book from his coat pocket, Treasure Island, Illustrated Edition. "Chapter 7, Thomas said eagerly. "You said you'd finish Chapter 7 today." Elias read aloud, his voice weaving magic into Stevenson's words. Around them, other children began to gather, drawn by the story. Clara watched from the doorway as this immortal creature gave these dying and suffering children the gift of his complete attention. When the reading ended, a nurse approached, an older woman with kind eyes. Mr. Thorne, you're a blessing. The children adore you. The feeling is mutual, Mrs. Brennan. Elias stood, and Clara saw him press something into the nurse's hand. Money, she realized. For whatever they need, books, sweets, anything to ease their days. Outside, as they walked through the hospital's gardens, Clara finally understood. You do this regularly, she said. Visit the children. Twice a week for the last 30 years, Elias confirmed. Under different names, of course. But yes, I read to them, bring them gifts, sit with the ones who are frightened. I cannot save them all, but I can make their remaining time less lonely. You're trying to save yourself, Clara said softly, by saving them. Elias stopped walking, his expression unguarded in a way she hadn't yet seen. Yes, he admitted. Every child I comfort, every dying patient I ease into death, every grave I visit, it's all an attempt to balance the scales, to prove I'm more than a monster who feeds on blood, to find meaning in an existence that should have ended 2 centuries ago. Clara moved closer, studying his face in the early morning light that made him wince. You're exhausted, she observed, depleted. The sun drains me. I'll need to feed soon, or I'll... Elias steadied himself against a garden wall. I'll be too weak to control the hunger. Fear flickered through Clara, but it was tempered by something else, understanding. This creature who had saved her was, in his own way, just as fragile. Come home, she said, taking his arm to steady him. Rest. She hesitated, then pushed forward. I'll help if you need it. Elias looked at her sharply. Clara, I would never ask... I know, but I'm offering. You pulled me from the river. This is how I begin to repay that debt. There is no debt. Then consider it friendship. Clara held his gaze. Even monsters need friends, don't they? Elias's expression cracked, revealing the lonely man beneath the immortal facade. Yes, he whispered. God help me. Yes. They returned to the house as full daylight blazed across London. Elias retreated to his chambers. Clara had learned he kept them below ground, where no sunlight could penetrate. She brought him tea he wouldn't drink and sat with him while he rested, weakened and vulnerable in a way that made him somehow more real. Thank you, he said, as sleep, that strange vampire sleep that was not quite sleep, claimed him. For not running, for staying, for seeing the man instead of the monster, Clara finished. You made that easy. You're the most human person I've ever known. And as Elias's eyes closed, as his body entered whatever twilight state sustained him through daylight hours, Clara made a decision. She would not only survive, she would learn to live. And she would do it alongside this impossible creature who had chosen mercy over nature, who had saved her for reasons neither of them fully understood yet. Outside, London thrived. Inside, a new kind of salvation was taking root between a girl who had chosen death and a vampire who had chosen life, even though one was mortal and one was not, even though every moment they shared was borrowed from an uncertain future. It happened on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after the river. Clara had begun keeping her own journal, following Elias's example. She wrote about the children at the hospital, the books she was reading from his library, the slow resurrection of her desire to exist. She wrote about him, too, this contradiction of a man who was not a man, who carried centuries with grace and guilt in equal measure. She found him in his study, slumped in his chair, his usual perfect posture abandoned. His skin looked grayer than normal, his amber eyes dimmed to something closer to brown. On the desk before him sat a letter written in elegant script on cream paper. "What's wrong?" Clara asked. Entering without knocking, a privilege he'd granted her after she'd proven she wouldn't run. "A patient I've been caring for, Mrs. Adelaide Winters, died this morning." Elias gestured to the letter. Her daughter wrote to thank Mr. Thorne for making her mother's final days bearable. She enclosed a photograph. Clara picked up the photograph. It showed an elderly woman with kind eyes, smiling despite her obvious frailty. "She looks peaceful." She was. Elias's voice was hoarse. "She told me stories about her childhood in Cornwall, about her husband who died in the Crimean War, about her 3 daughters and 7 grandchildren. She was 91 years old and ready to go. I stayed with her for 6 hours that final night, and she fell asleep mid-sentence, talking about the sea." Clara saw what was happening. Elias was grieving. Even after 200 years and countless deaths, each one still mattered to him. "When did you last feed?" she asked quietly. Elias looked away. 4 days ago. I've been busy with Mrs. Winters, and there have been no other patients ready to—" He stopped. "I'm managing." But he wasn't. Clara could see it now. The tremor in his hands, the way he kept his distance from her, the tension in his jaw that suggested he was fighting something primal and powerful. "You're starving," Clara said, and it wasn't a question. "I'll go to the hospital tonight. There's a patient with advanced consumption who's expressed willingness. I just need—" Elias stood, too quickly, and had to steady himself against the desk. "I need to rest first." Clara made her decision in that moment. "No," she said. "You don't need to wait. Use me." Elias's head snapped up, his eyes suddenly bright and terrible. "Absolutely not." "Why not? You've fed on countless willing people. I'm offering willingly. You're different." Elias moved away from her, putting the desk between them like a barrier. The others were dying. Death was imminent. Taking from them was mercy. But you— His voice roughened. "You have years ahead of you. Decades. I will not steal even a fraction of that time. You won't be stealing. I'm giving it freely." Clara moved around the desk, closing the distance he'd created. "Let me help you. Let me repay the life you saved." "There is no debt." Elias's control cracked, his voice rising. "I saved you because you deserved saving, because the world is better with you in it, because—" He stopped abruptly, something vulnerable flashing across his face. "Because what?" Clara pressed. Elias closed his eyes, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "Because when I pulled you from the river, I felt something I haven't felt in 2 centuries. Purpose beyond guilt, connection beyond obligation. You made me remember why I wanted to stay human, why I fought against this transformation even as it consumed me." The study was silent except for the ticking of an antique clock and the rain beginning to fall outside. "Then let me give you this," Clara said softly. She rolled up her sleeve, exposing her wrist. "Not as debt, as choice, as friendship, as—" She struggled for the word. "As trust." Elias stared at her exposed wrist, at the blue veins visible beneath pale skin, at the pulse beating steadily in testament to her living existence. His expression was torn between hunger and horror. "I could hurt you," he said. "If I start, I might not be able to stop. The hunger, when it's this strong, then I trust you to stop anyway," Clara said. "Because in 3 weeks, you've shown me more humanity than most humans ever did. Because you chose mercy over nature every single day for 200 years. Because I believe you're stronger than your curse." Elias's hands clenched at his sides. "Clara, please." She stepped closer, close enough to feel the cold radiating from him. "Let me do this one thing that matters. Let me be useful. Let me help you the way you've been helping me learn to live again." For a long moment, Elias stood frozen, warring with himself. Then slowly, with obvious reluctance, he reached out and took her wrist in his cold hands. "Just a little," he whispered. "Just enough to sustain me until I can reach the hospital." "Whatever you need," Clara said, and meant it. Elias guided her to sit in his chair. He knelt before her, this ancient, powerful creature, kneeling at her feet like a supplicant before an altar. He held her wrist gently, his thumb tracing over her pulse point. "This will hurt," he warned. "Not much, but I know." Clara's heart was racing, but not entirely from fear. There was something else mixed in: curiosity, intimacy, the strange thrill of being needed by someone who needed nothing. Elias brought her wrist to his mouth. His lips were cold against her skin. Then came the sharp sting of teeth breaking flesh, quick, surgical, precise. Clara gasped but didn't pull away. The sensation that followed was indescribable. Not pain exactly, but pressure. A drawing sensation, like water flowing out through a small opening. She felt her blood leaving her body, felt Elias's mouth sealed against her skin, felt his desperate control as he fought to take only what he needed and nothing more. 30 seconds, maybe 40. Then Elias pulled away, his lips stained red, his eyes burning with renewed life and something like shame. He immediately pressed a clean handkerchief to her wrist, applying pressure to stop the bleeding. "Enough," he said hoarsely. "That's enough." Clara felt dizzy, but not weak, lightheaded, but not faint. She watched as Elias carefully bandaged her wrist with supplies he kept in his desk drawer, evidence that this wasn't the first time he'd needed to care for a bleeding wound. "Thank you," he said finally, not meeting her eyes. "You shouldn't have done that, but thank you." "How do you feel?" Clara asked. "Stronger." Elias sat back on his heels, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Guilty, grateful, terrified by how much I wanted more, ashamed that I let you. "Don't." Clara touched his face, making him meet her gaze. Her hand was warm against his cold cheek. "Don't poison this with shame. It was my choice, my gift. Accept it as it was offered." Elias leaned into her touch for just a moment, a gesture so human and vulnerable that Clara's breath caught. Then he stood, putting distance between them again, rebuilding his walls. "You should rest," he said, back to his careful formality. "I took very little, but your body will need to recover. I'll bring you food, iron-rich, liver, spinach, red meat." "Elias," he stopped his nervous planning and looked at her. "You're allowed to need people," Clara said gently. "Even immortal ones, especially immortal ones." Something in his expression crumbled. He crossed back to her, and before Clara could react, he pulled her into an embrace, desperate, careful, cold arms around her living warmth. She felt him trembling. "I've been alone for so long," he whispered against her hair. "So long. And then you appeared in the river, drowning, and for the first time in 2 centuries I felt—" His voice broke. "I felt necessary again. Wanted. Real." Clara wrapped her arms around him, holding this immortal creature who had forgotten how to be held. "You are real," she promised. "The realest person I know." They stood that way for a long time, the vampire and the girl clinging to each other across the divide of life and death, mortal and eternal, broken and breaking, healing and healed. Outside, night fell completely. The rain intensified. And in that study filled with books and memories, and the ghost of Adelaide Winters's peaceful death, something shifted between Clara Morrison and Elias Thorne, something that felt dangerously close to love. Spring arrived reluctantly in London, bringing pale sunshine that Elias avoided and flower vendors that Clara bought from every morning. The house transformed with her presence. Windows opened, dust covers removed, vases filled with tulips and daffodils. 4 months had passed since the river. Clara had found employment as a private tutor for a merchant's daughter, work that allowed her independence while still keeping her evenings free. She had friends now, other young women from the neighborhood, Mrs. Hartley, who still helped with the house, even some of the nurses from St. Thomas's who'd grown fond of Mr. Thorne's assistant. She was, by all measures, living, but she was also falling. It happened gradually, then all at once, the way she'd heard drowning described. She would catch herself watching Elias read by lamplight, marveling at the concentration in his face. She'd find excuses to bring him tea he couldn't drink, just to sit in his company. She began to notice the small ways he cared for her, fresh flowers on her nightstand every week, her favorite books mysteriously appearing in the library, the way he always positioned himself between her and any potential danger when they walked London streets at night. And every few weeks, when his strength waned, she would offer her wrist. Each time, the act became less about survival and more about intimacy. A communion they didn't speak about, but both felt. The truth arrived on a Tuesday in April. They were in the music room, another space Clara had resurrected. She'd found a piano beneath a dust sheet and insisted Elias play. He resisted at first, claiming he'd forgotten, but his fingers remembered what his mind denied. He played Chopin, nocturnes that sounded like beautiful grief. Clara watched from the doorway, her heart aching with a feeling she could no longer deny. When the music ended, she spoke before courage could abandon her. "I think I'm falling in love with you." Elias's hands stilled on the keys. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't breathe. Not that he needed to breathe. Then he stood and walked to the window, putting his back to her. "You can't," he said quietly. "I can. I am." Clara moved into the room, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I've tried not to. Tried to convince myself it was gratitude or loneliness or the strangeness of our circumstances, but it's not. It's love. Clara. I love how you remember everyone you've ever met. I love that you visit dying children and read them pirate stories. I love that you've spent 2 centuries trying to balance scales that were never yours to carry. I love," her voice caught, "I love how you look at me like I'm the miracle, when you're the one who pulled me from death and taught me how to live again." Elias turned, and his face was devastated. "I am 237 years old," he said. "I am dead, a corpse walking, a monster sustained by blood. You are 23, alive, radiant with the future. This cannot happen." "Why not?" "Because," Elias crossed to her, his expression fierce, "because I will watch you age while I remain frozen. I will see you grow old, sicken, die, while I continue unchanged. I will bury you in 30 or 40 or 60 years, and then I will have an eternity to remember what I lost." "Then we'll have 30 or 40 or 60 years, Clara said. "Isn't that worth something? Isn't that better than both of us being alone?" "You don't understand." Elias's voice was anguished. "I've done this before, 3 times, 3 women I loved across 2 centuries, and I've watched all of them die." The revelation landed like a physical blow. Clara stepped back, processing. "Show me," she said finally. "What?" "Show me. Their graves, their stories, all of it. If you want me to understand why this is impossible, show me exactly what I'm asking you to endure again." They went at midnight to Brookwood Cemetery, the largest necropolis in London. Elias led Clara through sections of graves that spanned decades, his movements heavy with memory. He stopped first at a simple stone. Catherine Ashford, 1798-1831, beloved wife. "Catherine was a widow when I met her," Elias said. 1826. She was 33. Her husband had died in the war. She had no children, no family, no prospects. We met at a bookshop. She was buying poetry. I was..." He smiled faintly. "I was lonely." Clara remained silent, letting him speak. "I told her what I was after 6 months. She didn't believe me at first. Then she did, and she chose to stay anyway. We had 5 years together. 5 years of learning to love someone who couldn't age with me. She died of cholera in 1831. I stayed with her for 3 days, listening to her heartbeat slow, and I couldn't save her. My blood can't cure diseases. It can only prolong death, and she refused to be turned, said she wanted to die human. He moved to the next grave. Eleanor Whitmore, 1845-1892, teacher, friend, loved. Eleanor was a school teacher. I met her in 1873. She was 48, considered a spinster by society's standards. We had 19 years together. She aged. I didn't. She never minded, said she liked that I'd always remember her young, even though her body betrayed that youth. She died of consumption, another disease I couldn't stop. The third grave, Margaret Chen, 1890-1927, artist, dreamer, forever remembered. Margaret was a painter from Shanghai. I met her in Paris in 1922. She was 32. We had 5 years before she developed cancer. Again, I could only watch. She painted until her hands couldn't hold a brush anymore, and I stayed with her until the end. She made me promise not to turn her, said her art was meant to be finished, not eternal. Elias stood among these graves, 3 women who had loved him and died, and his face was a monument to accumulated grief. "You see," he said to Clara, "this is what you're asking me to do. Fall in love with you, knowing I'll bury you. Watch you age while I'm trapped in this unchanging body. Accumulate another loss I'll carry for the rest of eternity." Clara walked among the graves, touching each stone gently, feeling the weight of these love stories cut short by mortality. "Did you regret loving them?" she asked finally. "Never," Elias said without hesitation. "Not for a single moment. But the pain of losing them." His voice broke. "Clara, I still feel it. All 3. Catherine's last breath, Eleanor's final smile, Margaret's hand going cold in mine. I carry all of it, always." Clara turned to face him among the graves of his past loves. "Then you know," she said softly, "that even brief love is worth eternal grief, that those years mattered more than all the lonely centuries before and after, that being loved, even temporarily, is better than being safe and alone forever." Elias stared at her, this impossible woman who understood what he'd spent 2 centuries trying to accept. "I can't lose you too," he whispered. "You will," Clara said, moving closer. "Eventually, but not today. Not for decades if we're fortunate. And in the meantime, we could have something beautiful, something that makes the inevitable grief worthwhile." "You're asking me to be selfish," Elias said, "to take your mortal years knowing I'll survive them." "I'm asking you to be brave," Clara corrected, "to choose love even when you know how it ends, to let me choose you, knowing what I'm choosing." The cemetery was silent, except for wind through the trees and the distant sound of London waking. Elias looked at the 3 graves, then back at Clara, alive, radiant, offering herself, despite every rational reason not to. "If we do this," he said slowly, "you must promise me something. Anything. When the time comes, when you're dying, you'll let me turn you. You'll let me give you immortality. I can't—" His voice cracked. "I can't bury a 4th love. I can't survive it again." Clara's breath caught. He was offering her eternity, offering to share his curse rather than lose her. "That's not a decision I can make now," she said carefully. "When that moment comes, if it comes, we'll face it together. But I won't promise immortality when I don't know if I'd want it. What I will promise is this: I'll love you with everything I have for as long as I'm able. And whatever happens after, we'll choose together." It wasn't the answer Elias wanted, but it was honest, and he'd always valued her honesty above all else. He crossed to her, cupped her face in his cold hands, and kissed her for the first time, gentle, desperate, 2 centuries of loneliness meeting 4 months of resurrection. When they parted, Clara was crying and smiling simultaneously. "I love you," she said again. "I love you," Elias answered, the words rusty from disuse but no less true. God help us both. I love you. They left the cemetery hand in hand, the living and the undead, beginning something beautiful and doomed and worth every moment they would steal from fate. 7 years passed like a dream. Clara flourished. She became headmistress of a small school for girls, wrote poetry that was published in modest journals, and transformed Elias's Gothic manor into something that felt like home. They traveled when they could, Venice, Prague, Edinburgh, always at night, always in shadow, but together. Elias fed carefully, only from the dying, and Clara accompanied him on these mercy missions, witnessing how he transformed death into something gentle. She understood him completely now, the guilt and grace, the monster and the saint, inseparably intertwined. They loved each other with the intensity of borrowed time, but mortality is patient. Clara was 30 when the headaches started, small at first, easily dismissed. Then came the dizziness, the moments of confusion, the morning she woke unable to remember where she'd put her books. The doctor's diagnosis was delivered in his Harley Street office with clinical detachment, a tumor, inoperable, growing in the part of her brain that controlled memory and motor function. 6 months, perhaps less. Clara was 29 years, 8 months, and 12 days old. She told Elias that night in his study, watching his face shatter in real time. "No," he said simply. "No, we'll find another doctor, better doctors. Surgeons in Vienna, specialists in—" "Elias." Clara took his cold hands. "They're certain. I'm dying." The word hung between them like a blade. "Then I'll turn you," Elias said immediately. "Now, tonight, my blood can stop the progression, can heal the damage, can give you—" "Time to decide," Clara interrupted gently. "That's what I'm asking for. Time to be certain this is what I want. Immortality is forever, my love. I need to be sure." "How can you not be sure?" Elias's voice rose, desperate. "Death is oblivion, eternal nothing. I'm offering you life. Centuries, millennia, together." Clara pulled him to sit beside her, forcing him to meet her eyes. "You're offering me your curse," she said softly. "Your exile from daylight, from humanity, from ever knowing peace in death. I love you, but I need to be certain I can bear what you've borne for 2 centuries, that I'm strong enough to choose blood over breath. You are. You're the strongest person I know. Then trust that strength includes the right to choose carefully." Clara kissed his forehead. "Give me these 6 months. Let me live fully, humanly, completely. And when the time comes, I'll decide. Together, we'll decide." Elias wanted to argue, wanted to turn her immediately, consequences be damned. But he'd learned over 2 centuries that forcing immortality on someone unwilling was the greatest cruelty. Catherine had taught him that. 6 months, he agreed, his voice breaking. "But I won't lose you. When the moment comes, I'll beg if I have to." "I know," Clara whispered, "and I'll listen." The months that followed were brutal in their beauty. Clara's symptoms progressed. She began forgetting words, then names, then entire conversations. Her balance faltered. Her hands trembled. But through it all, she remained present, grateful, determined to extract every drop of meaning from her remaining time. They spent evenings in the music room, Elias playing piano while Clara listened, committing the sound to whatever memory remained. They visited the children's hospital, where Clara read stories when her vision allowed. They walked the Thames embankment at midnight, Clara bundled against cold she felt more acutely now, Elias supporting her when her legs wavered. "Tell me again," Clara would say on her worst days. "Tell me who I am." And Elias would remind her, "You are Clara Morrison. You were born June 3rd, 1866. You walked into the Thames at 23 wanting to die, and I pulled you out. You taught me that choosing to live is the bravest thing anyone can do. You love poetry, children, spring flowers, and me. You made my house feel like home for the first time in 200 years. You are loved. You are remembered. You matter." On her good days, Clara would smile and say, "I know. I just like hearing you say it." On her bad days, she'd cry, terrified of the person she was losing, the memories slipping away like water through desperate fingers. 3 months became 2. 2 became 1. Clara grew frailer, spending more time sleeping, eating less, existing in the twilight between consciousness and absence. Elias rarely left her side, reading aloud when she was awake, holding her hand when she wasn't. "Turn me now," Clara whispered one night in October, her voice barely audible, "before I forget why I wanted to stay." "Are you certain?" Elias asked, though his heart soared with desperate hope. "I'm certain I love you," Clara said. "I'm certain I'm not ready to leave you. I'm certain that whatever comes after, centuries of blood and shadow, will be bearable if we face it together. Turn me, Elias. Make me like you. Let us have forever." Elias kissed her gently, tasting salt from her tears and his own. "It will hurt," he warned, "the transformation, like dying and being reborn simultaneously." "I know. Do it anyway." He waited until midnight, when the world was quietest. Clara lay in their bed, pale and trembling, her heartbeat weak but steady. Elias sat beside her, his expression resolute, despite the fear coursing through him. "I love you," he said, "through this and beyond." "I love you," Clara whispered back. "Make me eternal." Elias bit into his own wrist, drawing blood that looked black in the candlelight. He held it to Clara's lips. "Drink," he commanded gently, "as much as you can." Clara drank, choking at first on the cold, metallic taste, then finding rhythm. She felt his blood enter her system like ice water through her veins, felt something fundamental beginning to shift. When she'd taken enough, Elias pulled away and positioned himself over her throat. "The venom comes next," he said. "From my bite. It will hurt more than anything you've ever felt, but I'll be here. Every moment. I promise." "Do it," Clara said, and closed her eyes. Elias bit down. Clara screamed. The transformation took 3 days. Clara's body burned from the inside, every cell rewriting itself, mortality torn away and replaced with something ancient and wrong. Elias never left her, enduring her screams, her convulsions, her moments of unconsciousness followed by violent waking. On the 3rd night, the burning stopped. Clara opened her eyes. The world exploded into sensory overload. She could hear every heartbeat in the house, the mice in the walls, the servants 3 floors below, the man walking past their gate outside. She could see in perfect darkness, every shadow defined, every color impossibly vivid. She could smell blood, distant and intoxicating, calling to something new and hungry inside her. "Elias," her voice sounded different, clearer, stronger, inhumanly resonant. "I'm here." He appeared beside her immediately, his face showing 3 days of worry. "How do you feel?" Clara sat up, testing her new body. No pain, no weakness, no trembling hands or foggy thoughts. She felt powerful, predatory, perfect, and terrified. "I'm hungry," she whispered. "God, I'm so hungry. I know. I've prepared for this." Elias helped her stand, steadying her as she adjusted to supernatural strength and balance. "We'll go to the hospital. There's a patient. Mr. Patterson, 87 years old, dying of heart failure. He's consented to help with your first feeding." Clara nodded, unable to speak past the hunger clawing at her throat. They moved through London with inhuman speed, arriving at St. Thomas's within minutes. In a private room, an elderly man lay sleeping, his breathing shallow, his time measured in hours. "Remember," Elias coached quietly. "Control, precision. Take only what you need. Feel for the moment when life ebbs. and stop before that final breath. Clara approached the bed, her new senses overwhelming. She could hear the man's failing heart, smell the blood beneath his skin, feel the heat of his fading life. When she bit down, instinct took over. The blood was ecstasy. She drank deeply, feeling strength flood her system, feeling the hunger abate. But beneath the satisfaction, she felt Mr. Patterson's life flowing away, felt the exact moment his heart would stop if she didn't. She pulled back. The man sighed peacefully and slipped into death, painless and natural, his final moments eased by the venom in her bite. Clara stepped away, shaking, her mouth stained red. "You did perfectly," Elias said, pride and relief in his voice. Controlled, merciful, exactly right. But Clara was crying. "I killed him. You eased his passing. He was dying anyway. You gave him peace." "I'm a monster now," Clara whispered. "Like you." "Yes," Elias agreed gently. "Like me. And like me, you'll learn to carry it with grace." They returned home as dawn threatened. Clara moved instinctively toward shadows, her new body rejecting the coming sun. In Elias's underground chambers, she finally looked at herself in the mirror. Nothing reflected back. "I'm gone," she said, touching the glass. "I'm not there." "Your body is gone from reflection," Elias corrected. "But you're still here, still you, still Clara." But was she? Clara touched her face, feeling the cold skin, the unnatural stillness. No heartbeat. No breath unless she consciously chose to breathe. No warmth. "Tell me who I am," she said, echoing those desperate months of forgetting. Elias moved behind her, his hands on her shoulders, both of them absent from the mirror's truth. "You are Clara Morrison Thorne," he said. "You are my wife in everything but legal name. You chose immortality for love. You are learning to be vampire with the same courage you learned to be alive. You are—" He paused, and Clara heard the emotion in his voice. "You are home." Clara turned in his arms, seeing him clearly with her new vision. He was beautiful and terrible and hers. "Teach me," she said. "Teach me to be what you are. Teach me to carry this with grace." "I will. For centuries, for millennia, for however long we have." They stood together in the darkness, two immortals beginning forever, their reflections absent, but their presence undeniable. Weeks passed. Clara adapted faster than Elias expected. She learned to control her strength, her speed, her hunger. She accompanied him to hospitals, learning the art of merciful death. She read voraciously, filling her immortal existence with knowledge as he had done. But something was wrong. One evening, Clara found Elias in his study, looking at photographs. She recognized herself in them. Clara at 30, smiling in their garden. Clara at 25, reading to children. Clara at 23, soaking wet on the Thames embankment, newly saved. "I don't remember that," Clara said, pointing to the hospital photograph. "Being there, reading to those children." Elias looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "The tumor," Clara said slowly, pieces connecting. "It damaged my memory before you turned me. And vampirism preserves us exactly as we are in the moment of transformation, which means—" her voice broke. "I lost those memories. Forever. The transformation locked me in place with pieces of my life already missing." Elias set down the photographs, his expression devastated. "What do you remember?" Clara closed her eyes, searching. "I remember the river, being saved. The first months in your house, the cemetery where you showed me your past loves. But after that, it's fragmented, pieces missing. Entire years reduced to impressions. The last 7 years," Elias whispered. "Our time together. The traveling, the school, the—" He stopped. "You don't remember our 7 years. Not all of it, not most of it." Clara opened her eyes, and they were anguished. I remember loving you, but I can't remember all the reasons why. I can't remember the moments that built this love into something worth dying for. Elias pulled her into his arms, holding her as she trembled. Then I'll remember for both of us, he promised. I'll tell you every story, every moment, every reason. I'll be your memory, Clara, your living archive. Nothing is truly lost if someone remembers. You'll spend eternity reminding me who I was. Gladly, Elias said. Gratefully. It's the smallest price to pay for forever together. Clara held him tighter, understanding now the complexity of her choice. She'd gained immortality, but lost pieces of her mortality. She had centuries ahead, but would spend them partially blank, dependent on Elias to fill her missing years. Tell me again, she whispered, settling into their shared darkness. And Elias began to speak, weaving their 7 years into story, giving her back what the tumor had stolen, proving that love could survive even in fragments. London, 2227. The city had changed beyond recognition. Flying vehicles crossed glass skyscrapers. Humanity had spread to Mars and beyond. But in a Gothic manner preserved by historic designation, 2 vampires remained unchanged. Clara stood at the window, watching the world rush past at speeds Victorian London never imagined. Behind her, Elias entered carrying an ancient leather journal. Tell me again, Clara said, the ritual unchanged across 200 years. Which part? Elias asked, though he knew. The beginning, the river, how you saved me. Elias opened the journal to yellowed pages written in his own hand, entries from October 1893. You walked into the Thames at midnight, he began, and Clara listened as she'd listened thousands of times before. You had stones in your pockets. You wanted to die, but I pulled you from the water and breathed you back to life, and everything changed. Clara turned from the window, her face peaceful as the story washed over her. The tumor-damaged memories never returned, locked away by vampirism's preservation. But Elias had written everything down, every moment, every word, every precious detail of their 7 mortal years. He'd become her memory, just as he'd promised. And then, Clara prompted, and then you chose to live, you taught children, you published poetry. You made my house into a home. We had 7 perfect years before the tumor, and every moment of those years is written here. He held up the journal. Nothing is lost as long as I remember. Clara crossed to him, took the journal, read entries in his familiar hand. November 3rd, 1896. Clara laughed today while reading to the children at hospital. Her joy is the most human sound I've heard in a century. April 12th, 1898. We walked through Hyde Park at midnight. She said the stars looked like promises. I didn't tell her I'd seen those same stars for 200 years, and they'd never looked like that until she pointed them out. Thank you, Clara whispered, for remembering when I can't. It's not sacrifice, Elias said, taking her hand. It's privilege. I carry our story so you don't have to. I remember so you can be present. It's the smallest thing I can offer in exchange for eternity with you. They'd had 200 years together since her transformation. 200 years of learning to be vampires, of mercy killings that eased the dying, of traveling the world as it transformed beyond imagination. They'd witnessed wars and peace, technology and terror, humanity's darkest and brightest moments. And through it all, Elias had kept writing, kept documenting, kept preserving their story against the inevitable erosion of even immortal memory. Do you ever regret it? Clara asked. Turning me? Binding yourself to someone who can't fully remember what we were? Elias cupped her face, his amber eyes holding 2 centuries of accumulated love. Never, he said fiercely. You're here. You're alive as we can be. You chose me, Clara. You chose us. The missing memories don't matter. We're building new ones every single night. Clara leaned into his touch. Tell me what we did yesterday. We visited the Lunar Colony Children's Hospital. You read them stories about old Earth, about rivers and rain and things their generation will never know naturally. A little girl asked if monsters were real. You said yes, but some monsters choose kindness. She said she wanted to meet a kind monster. You said she already had. Clara smiled. I remember that. Good. I'll write it down tonight anyway, just in case. They stood together in their preserved Gothic manner, surrounded by journals spanning 2 centuries, artifacts of a love that had survived death, transformation, memory loss, and time itself. Do you think, Clara said softly, that those 3 women, Catherine, Eleanor, Margaret, do you think they'd be glad you found me? That you chose to risk this again? Elias was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he crossed to a shelf and pulled down 3 very old journals from the 1800s. Catherine wrote me a letter before she died, he said, opening the journal and showing Clara faded ink. She made me promise to love again. Said her only regret was that I'd spend eternity alone after her death. She wanted me to be brave enough to risk this again. He opened another journal. Eleanor painted me a picture, 2 figures in darkness, holding each other. She said it was us in every lifetime, that even if she couldn't stay, someone else would find me, someone worth the risk. The 3rd journal. Margaret made me swear I wouldn't let her death mean the death of my capacity for love. She said monsters who refuse to love are truly lost, but monsters who love despite knowing loss are the most human of all. Clara traced the words, these blessings from Elias's past loves, giving permission for their future. Then I'm grateful to them, she said, for teaching you that love survives loss, that choosing connection is always worth the cost. Elias closed the journals and pulled Clara into his arms. I would do it all again, he said. The river, the saving, the 7 years, the tumor, the transformation, the memory loss, all of it. Every moment of pain and fear and uncertainty, because it led to 200 years of this. Of what? Of you, of us, of love that refused to end even when death demanded it. They kissed in the lamplight, 2 immortal creatures who'd chosen each other across every impossible boundary. Outside, the 23rd century thrived. Inside, a love born in 1893 continued undiminished. Clara pulled back, her eyes bright with vampire luminescence. Tell me something I don't know about us, she said. Something you haven't told me before. Elias smiled, reaching for a journal from 1895. I started falling in love with you the moment you asked me to teach you how to want to live again. Because in that moment, I realized I'd been asking myself that same question for 200 years. And maybe, just maybe, we could find the answer together. Clara's eyes filled with vampire tears, blood-tinged, precious, rare. Did we? She asked. Find the answer? Elias looked at her. At their home filled with 2 centuries of collected memories, at the journals documenting their impossible love story, at the future stretching infinitely before them. Yes, he said. The answer is simple. We want to live because we have each other. Because love, even broken, even fragmented, even complicated by immortality and missing memories, is the only thing that makes forever bearable. Clara kissed him again, deeper this time, and whispered against his lips. Then write that down. Write that we found the answer. That a girl who drowned and a vampire who saved her discovered that the meaning of immortality is simply this: someone to remember you, someone to be remembered by, someone to spend eternity becoming more human with, not less. I will, Elias promised. I'll write it tonight, and I'll write tomorrow too, and the day after, every moment, every kiss, every time you ask me to tell our story. I'll document it all so nothing is ever truly lost. Good, Clara said, and smiled with fangs that had learned gentleness. Because I want to remember this. Even if I forget, I want you to remember for me. Remember that we chose this, that we chose each other, that we chose love over oblivion, connection over safety, messy forever over perfect endings. They held each other as night deepened, two vampires who'd spent centuries learning that immortality's greatest gift wasn't eternal life. It was eternal love, witnessed and documented and cherished by someone who refused to let a single moment fade. And in his study later, Elias opened a new journal and began to write. November 15th, 2227. Today Clara asked me to tell our story again. I always do. She said she wants to remember this, the choosing, the love, the messy forever. I told her I'll remember for both of us. After 200 years, she still makes immortality feel like grace instead of curse. She still teaches me that monsters can learn humanity through love. She still makes me glad I pulled her from that river so long ago. Note to future Clara, when you read this, you chose well. We both did. And I love you exactly as you are, memory intact or not, mortal or immortal, broken or whole. Thank you for 200 years. Here's to 200 more. Elias. Outside. The future hummed and thrived. Inside, a vampire closed his journal and returned to his wife, ready to tell their story one more time, and every time after that for as long as forever lasted. Subscribe if you believe mercy can resurrect even the damned. Comment where you're watching from, and whether you'd choose forever for a love that sees your soul. Like if you understand that some stories never end, they just find new ways to be told, remembered, and loved across the infinite expanse of time.